this whole play of BI and data and analytics being such a big thing, especially in the banking, financial services, insurance industry, there is a huge play for generative AI, and I don't see why for some of the engagements that we have done in this space in the past.
This concept of where to draw the line on money becomes a serious thing, right?
Yes.
Cost and value, right? There's a cost aspect to it, and what is the value I can get out of it? Fundamentally, you're trying to replace something that you're doing in your own brain with another machine, right? So there is a value to be considered, right?
The insurance company is bidding for winning the contracts for the other businesses. It's a B2B use case.
Yeah, it's a B2B, and it's bidding for win the insurance contracts. That's all, right?
Hello everyone, welcome to our podcast Decoding Decisions. I am Vishal, Reddy. I head the strategy and M&A practice at CRMIT. I am accompanied by Padmanabha, also known as Paddy. Paddy is our thought leader and principal consultant in the area of data to decisions at CRMIT Solutions. Paddy, thank you for being here.
It's a pleasure to be there, Vishal.
To either of these engagements, if you were to add the layer of generative AI today, do you see them being any different, more efficient?
Yeah, that's a very tough question, to be very frank. Why? Because, like I said, it's a new paradigm, generative AI. LLMs are entirely, you can't compare them to big data, ML, whatever, right? In some ways, right? One is maths, the other one is English, from that sense, or whatever languages, right? So there is no doubt that generative AI can be applied to those same problems, right? And probably the outcomes are going to be different, maybe for the better. And if you don't do a proper job, maybe for the worst too. You never know, right?
Yes.
So the first thing is can be applied. That's the first thing, I think, because it's a decision point, right? And generative AI is useful for decisions, right? So that much is clear, right? But like I said, again, how exactly to apply them in those same things, just to take, you're asking a hypothetical question. If we had that benefit and if we had to simply repeat off the old one and try to plug in a generative AI approach to that same problem, where would it land is a general hypothetical question, right? So on that hypothetical question, it's doable, but I think one has to think through, right? But if you take a step back again, I think of the two examples, the second one is probably more amenable for generative AI. I would say, right? The health insurance example I spoke about, right? Because it is dealing with different languages, right? There are different people in our whole value chain that we spoke about, right? So, and that is what it's less numbers, less maths, in that sense. I mean, maths is everywhere, money is everywhere, but I mean, it's more language, it's more of patterns, it's understanding things and reacting and responding and so on. So in that sense, I would say second example is probably more amenable for generative AI. I'm not saying the first one isn't. A person I've not thought through it myself, but I'm sure it is because today banking itself has changed. Bank changes every day, right? It's a more dynamic of all the businesses. So generative AI has a role in businesses. We had a recent, we cannot name names, but we had a recent inquiry in our company, right? Another foreign bank, right, in Europe approached us and said, can we think of solutions in the Indian language, right? That. So, I'm sure that is possible. Think through it.
No, I think typically even in the recent past and, historically, this whole play of BI and data and analytics being such a big thing, especially in the banking, financial services, insurance industry, there is a huge play for generative AI, and I don't see why for some of the engagements that we have done in this space in the past, it definitely gives different outcomes, but for the better is what we like to believe in the way it is. Now, moving to CRMIT as an organization's flagship, what we call Agent Success Value Plan. How do you see CRMIT enabling organizations to realize faster time to value from their agentic AI implementations? I'm speaking from the context of typically when you talk about AI and the use of GenAI, people are always talking about data and how they really need to get their data into a certain lake, build the warehouse, build the infrastructure essentially, so that generative AI can give you results which are less hallucinated, and its access to data is more governed. It's also more responsible. But in some cases, it need not necessarily be that every organization needs to invest that kind of money to build a warehouse or build a lake. And generative AI can access, both, as we all know, structured and unstructured data. How do you see this being an advantage in terms of realizing faster time to value? And we package this as an organization into what we call our ASVP, or Agent Success Value Plan. But just wanted to hear your thoughts on that as well.
Sure. I think we've named the Agent Success Value Plan because the current buzz or the current demand, let's say the current dominant or increasing, growing utilization of generative AI in the form of agents, right, or agentic AI, as we call them, right? At least in the world of enterprise, as we see it, right? So with that, that's the background for the Agent Success Value Plan. So the first off, of course, is that figuring out the use cases, to for an agent, right? To define an agent, if again it goes back to what we were talking in the beginning itself. It's about keeping the decisions in our, in scope, and then drilling down to it to see, okay, this could be an agent, this could be made into an agent, or this is not possible, right? So again, it also depends on what is the state of the art of agentic AI available as well, right? And that is also evolving. It's still about a year old, I would say, as a domain. So that's the other part of it. But to your question on the whole Agent Success Value Plan, right? So the words are there. We need to make a success of that of agentic AI as we implement them. But the key operative word from our product side is the value part of it, right? It's quite easy. There's one thing to understand the economics of generative AI, right? Even as the unit cost will come down through sheer industrial competition, right? And compute and memory become cheaper, right? While that will go on its own, the investments are still large, right? So the prices are going, as you utilize them, the nature of that whole generative AI is such that you will run up. It'll become expensive to actually. Not expensive, it'll cost you money to utilize knowledge, to get knowledge. That's what these machines are, right? They'll give you knowledge. So it's not like knowledge is free. I mean, it involves power and CPU and memory and algorithms and computing science. So those cost money and they have to be recouped, right? So, and they're quite expensive in terms of running those machines, right? So there is a cost associated. So that price of consuming that knowledge, right? Generating knowledge and consuming those machines is just an ever-growing thing. It is not like you pay one time and then you can just get it on infinite basis. You have to keep paying for it, right? So that's the element to be kept in mind, right? So when you keep that in mind, and then you go back to the basics of what we spoke about, right? Finding the right valuable use case for that AI, right?
What are the decisions that I can use generative AI, right?
Exactly.
Are these repetitive decisions? Are these one-off?
Correct.
Right?
Exactly.
So,
those are the more fundamental thing. And then the repetitive, it means you will keep using the machine again and again, right? Because in machines you cannot store them, you cannot remove them, right? So this concept of where to draw the line on money becomes a serious thing, right? Cost and value, right? There's a cost aspect to it, and what is the value I can get out of it? Because fundamentally you're trying to replace something that you're doing in your own brain with another machine, right? So there is a value to be considered, right? So this whole cost and value equation is a pretty unsettled equation right now, right? It's up in the air, let me put it that way, right? So many firms and many people are working through it to find out where the line falls, right? If you spend too much, if there's no value, then it doesn't work out in business. Everything has to make economic sense in a business, right? And if you think you're going to put a boundary on that and underspend, you're not going to get the real value. It just becomes another wasted thing, So that equation is quite, it's still up in the air, people are doing. And so that's where, I think the ASVP can be a bit of a support, I would say. As a company, we invest in people and training and knowledge. So we can assist our customers in tackling that value equation, gradually taking steps one by one. You don't have to go all in, right? But there is that POCs to be done. There is the analysis to be done. There's a lot of user research to be done. These are intellectual exercises, right? And you may not have that bandwidth in your own company. You do in a given customer organization. So you need to apply some of it. But as a systems integrator, right? We can bring that talent and time to the table and help reduce the risks involved in utilizing AI in a given organization. So that's the background behind that value part of the value plan, right? So it's important to get that, right? It's not about saying we're going to give you a cheap solution. No, it's not possible. I mean, I think it's value stuff. But then there are risks involved in this whole thing, right? And it's probably going to remain there for quite some time to come, a few years to come, right? So that's where we're saying collaborating with us, and we can collaborate with the customer to reduce those risks, and therefore increase the probability of generating value, in that engagement. That's the second part.
Yes.
But back to your question on with the other element, which you said about structured and unstructured data and so on, right? So that too is part of the value thing, right? So this AI is a new domain. There are so many variables, right? So, for example, to your question about data storage, right? Yeah, most businesses have data, right?
Yeah.
Most of the structure, right? There's a lot of probably of 7 to 10 times unstructured data in a business, right? So, in the last 10, 15 years, we've had an industry of solutions, for data integrations, right? To data lakes, as you call them, to pour them, create data lakes and data warehouses and data marts. These have been quite expensive. Now they will also become cheaper because as they start sunsetting or they become a bit less relevant or bit less critical to business, their prices too will reduce, right? But nonetheless, they are still very technical systems. So there is a simple cost of this labor and time to even implement those things, right? Yeah. And sometimes you not need them in the world of AI as much as you perhaps would have utilized them in the past. But there too, there is other technical value as well. So there too, there's an element, right? Yeah. What tools to use in your journey of AI, right? So there too, because we are a technical company, we are a technology company, we are SI. So there too, we can advise and assist on putting the right tools in place. There are many free tools available. There are lower cost tools available, just as powerful, just as meaningful. Yeah. You don't have to go for the big brand names. It may not be relevant, right? So you're making those right choices. We are an engineering firm, so that too is the other aspect of that value plan. Being the right advice as you course through your AI journey on the right tools.
Yeah, it's interesting because there's so much of, I would say, management consulting from a technology standpoint involved in what we call our ASVP plan, as much as the actual implementation of it. Correct. Because it's a lot of the engagements that are happening in the pre-AI areas where cloud is sort of not matured totally, but it has come close to maturation, and a lot of customers come in and they know what to implement, and they have certain strategy in mind, roadmap in mind, and it's a more of a reactive environment. Yeah. For the most part, right? Correct. But in this, it has to be a lot more proactive, because it's about the one who takes that first leap, and it's also has that keen interest to work with an SI or a specialist like us, to take them through that journey, to help them better realize the value of AI, whether it's in terms of speed, or it's in terms of investment, or it's even in terms of how do I do it, right? That's the point. So I think that's a super critical part. This is a follow-up question to some of the past engagements that I was talking about, and what we are working currently with an organization, the Fortune 10 company that we spoke about, in the domain of healthcare, insurance. We have been doing some good amount of work in the agentic AI space, Paddy. As you know, I wanted you to shed some more light in terms of what is this that we're building, and how can it be relevant to a lot more, not just insurance companies, healthcare, financial services companies as well. So,
okay. So this is just about an example of where we're applying generative AI or large language models, right? One of our existing customers. Before that, maybe we can take a step back to see there's a consensus in the industry, and it's also somewhat common senseful. One could understand that, right? What are the typical patterns situations where or general problems for where generative AI can be the current state of the art can be easily applied, relatively applied, right? Usefully applied, right? What are those, right? So broadly, 3 things, right? One is document generation, right? I'll come to it, but let me just list them out, right? And second one is tracking changes, right? Something undergoing changes, and we track changes. There are many cases where we track changes, right? So you can deploy these machines to help you track changes and summarize those changes, right? And the third kind of a pattern is just mining huge libraries, technical libraries, for example, right? The library is just too vast. I mean, take a typical book of a cheap CPU, right? They run into thousands of pages, right? So anything today is highly specified. So just mining them for a given question or a given situation, right? So they can do it in a few seconds versus you spending days doing it. Right? So broadly, those are 3 patterns, I would say, in which one can today deploy, exploit, utilize GenAI, right? So this example that you're asking about comes in the first category is document generation. But let's understand what goes into document generation. When you or I, any of us write documents, when we generate a document, there are many things going on in that activity, right?
Yes. Yeah.
One of the first things is figuring out the audience to whom I'm making the document. There's a particular audience. You never write a document for the whole world. There's a particular, we might call it as an objective, but there's a particular audience at and to for whom you write that document,
Yes.
right? So it means that in our concept, in our brains, we have a concept of that audience. We know what they know. We know what they may not know. We know what they don't know. There's a whole lot of common knowledge, as we call, about that audience that I have in my brain when I'm making a document for that audience, right? It's quite a lot of things that goes on in our brains, right? So something as simple as document generation is a whole lot of stuff, right? Just to be aware of the problems. That area itself is not trivial. It's quite complex, right? So anyway, so that's it, right? So in this example, right? So what are the common examples of documents that people make in business? Very common example, proposals.
Yes.
Right? You might make a proposal, sales proposal, right? Or within your service teams, you're making documents as you transfer knowledge or information about an assessment of an issue from one team to another to resolve them as you escalate them through a chain, right? Or in the case of, again, market-based competition, RFPs and RFQs,
Yes.
you're responding to some format your customer is asked for,
Correct.
prospect is asked for, and all of you are competing against, right? And these are quite extensive documents, right?
Yes.
And depending on the business, and the example you're talking about is the healthcare insurance, right? It's a very complex domain. It's complex and complicated, right? There's a whole lot of information dealt with, right? So this example speaking about is about an RFP, right? Building a machine, building a tool using generative AI to assist the team that responds to fills up an RFP, which produces an RFP, right? So an RFP is a very, let's just briefly spend a minute understanding what an RFP typically is, right? It's a request for proposal, right? So the customer is given some context of their requirements in some level of detail. It is not too high level. It's not highly detailed, but it's reasonably well detailed. They're quite clear what they want and what they don't want either. Both of them, right? So that is one part of it, and that's one context to keep in mind to really comprehend that stuff. Because if you don't respond to that, then you're not really having a conversation on that thing. And second is the competitive environment, right?
Yeah.
You're just one bidder.
Yeah.
There are other bidders. You need to understand who are the other bidders, right? And then there's a third thing of what your own capability is. What is that you want to respond with?
Yeah.
Just because I want, ABC, you may not want to respond to it. You may not be able, you may not have it available, or you may not be interested in
what's your
supplying
SWOT,
it.
right?
Whatever. So there are broadly at least these three things. What is that you want to offer? What is the customer wants? And then there is the competitive environment. It's really the whole of real free market, right?
Yeah.
All of that is involved in a simple generating an RFP, right?
Yes.
And now if you want to bring our very powerful generative AI, and that's what this particular project that we've been doing involves, right? So
Again, these are RFPs for where the insurance company is bidding for winning the contracts for other businesses. It's a B2B use case.
It's a B2B, and it's bidding for win the insurance contracts. That's all, right? So in this project, we had to break them. So there are templates, there are knowledges that the company has in terms of what a strategy is to go to market. We all have our claim to fame in the market. This is what we want to do. So the company has a strategy on what it wants to offer. It is templatized that. And again, it's not just one template. There are variations to it, right? Depending on the customer's situation, categorization, there are templates to be applied. And these are just templates. You have to fill the knowledge, information into it, right? But that's one part of the thing that goes into the RFP. And second is the circumstantial, this market data, which is like more or less undefined. You don't know you can't define a market. So to some extent, that is somewhat templatized, but for the most part, there'll probably remain a human, process, right? And third one is the actual requirements that the customer has placed. Again, that may not come in the format that you understand. They'll have their own format, right? You have to understand that format. Again, it is not too variegated. In some sense, the requirements, it's about health insurance, right? So in that sense, the product is well defined, right? So you can sort of make sense of any customer's requirement, list, right? And that's where we've been exploiting the machine to first understand a given whatever requirements came through, to make sense of it in whatever format, process document and make it intelligible, some humans to read them, or for another machine to use them, right? That's one part of it. And second part, these templates and knowledge, repository of knowledge and templates the company has, right? In terms of what it wants to offer, how does it want to respond, all of it, what to offer, how to offer, all of that is part of your response, right? So there's a whole long library built over the decades by the company. It's a deep knowledge. So that too is all language. So we are building machines to digest them and to bring it to the table here. The working table is where these things come into play. Again, the content knowledge, I don't think we've spent much work on that. There is still the human in the loop.
Yeah.
But that's what this project is trying to do, right? To bring all this, to build some automated solution on document, which then, of course, has to go through human processing and so on.
Again, we're talking about the idea of reusability and you know, the repetitive task of constantly bidding for new proposals.
Correct. That's your digital
Responding
labor,
to
right? If you
proposals,
have these machines, you can produce, we can respond to 10 more proposals perhaps than you were able to do before. Yeah.
And then given that we do, as you mentioned, there's a certain border and you understand where to play when you're bidding for some of these RFPs, and a lot of the data, say 50% can be reusable in some shape and form. That's where the power of the machine comes in, right? So that's where,
and that's 50% versus 0% before.
Yeah.
So that's a huge value.
Correct. You may be spending 10-12 days just filling or working through that 40-50% before moving to your competitor landscape or other human in the loop or human intelligence activities, which can be significantly reduced in terms of the time consumption, right? So we have gotten some positive response as we work through some of the phases. It's a learning for both the customer and CRMIT as an organization, but definitely a good engagement to reuse, replicate for other customers as well. So sure. Thanks for that, Paddy. Thank you for tuning into this podcast today, everybody. We hope this was insightful, helpful. Stay tuned to some of our other episodes under the banner Decoding Decisions.